All right, welcome back. Now we're gonna get into the next part of this class, which is the UCI visual design. Now we wanna figure out how we're gonna style our UCIs. There are a few different ways that we can do this. We have native properties. You've probably worked with it already. That right panel that just says properties when you're working with the UCI. That's one way we can do this. The other ways are involving CSS. For those of you who aren't familiar with CSS and you keep asking, what does that mean? Well, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. And essentially, the style sheet itself is a document that tells the presenting device how to display the various elements within it. So it can say something like, is this a title? Great. Then it is going to have this text font. It is going to have this color. It's going to be this size. Is this a mute button? Then it's going to have this graphic attached to it, or it's going to be this color. And the style sheet itself is what compiles all of that and then tells the device how to display those things.
Yeah, anybody that has built a modern website in the last 15 years, you know what CSS is, and you're able to apply that same style sheet across an entire website. Well, we've applied, again, a standard off-the-shelf technology like CSS and applied it so that somebody like you might actually be able to go outside of our own sphere to learn how to apply it to things like Q-SYS.
Yeah, and if someone at the company that hired us knows how to make that CSS, they may have made it. We could have made our own, or maybe we did it in conjunction, with the company. Right.
You could apply a pre-built style sheet. That's something that somebody else already made and that you're being given or you're just using yourself. You would install it, apply it to the UCI, and that's going to be a lot quicker than building out your own style sheet. We'll go through these one by one, starting with native properties, just reminding ourselves of a few of the things. It should be a quick review. And then we'll get into the two style sheet methods as well. First, with the native properties. So if you're on your UCI and you select any sort of control or anything that's basically on your UCI, you're going to be given certain properties on the right-hand side. Now, I've selected a button and it's giving me a bunch of button properties. We've already seen plenty of these, right? Presentation, we could change the way it's presented. Push action for a button. What we're really looking at here that's sort of universal to most of the pieces that you would put on a UCI are these graphic properties.
Actually, I'll run through all those graphic properties really quickly. Some of these may make a lot of sense to be intuitive, but just in case you don't know, position is the first one. That's an XY coordinates. That's in pixels from the top left corner of your screen. So if I put this way up in the top left, you can see it's going to be at 0, 0. That's also measured by the top left corner of the object itself. So wherever this corner is in relation to that corner up there. The size is its literal width and height in pixels. When you choose the fill, you can choose to pick a color. You can do this by a hex code. You can do this by RGB. You can do it by hue, saturation, and brightness. Worth noting, there's also a transparency option, so you can choose to make your colors semi-transparent or entirely invisible if that's what you wanted. There is a field of recently used design colors, so you don't need to keep on entering in the same hex code. This will automatically populate with the ones you use. Worth noting that for buttons, when you click a button, by default, the off color will be linked as a darker shade of the on color. That's what this little chain icon is. If you break the chain, first of your name, mother of dragons, breaker of chains, then you can choose your own, thank you, you can choose your own customized off color for that button rather than have it automatically chosen for you. What else? Corner radius. So corner radius will give you the roundness of the edges. That may sound a little weird, but if I have this button and if I want to make it square, I can make this 200 by 200. If I wanted to make it then a circle, I would give it a corner radius that is equal to half of one of its dimensions. So if its corner radius was 100, now I have a perfect circle.
And if you wanted to make it breathe fire, you would say Dracarys.
And you just made a perfect circle in our references. How about that?
You're welcome.
What else? The margin. The margin is the pixel bank between the border of your object and its visual space. So if I made the margin of this maybe 20, you'll see that the button itself appears to shrink, but the footprint of its usability on your touchscreen has not changed. So it gives you a little bit of a border around your control, for people with fat finger syndrome. That's different than padding. Padding applies an area internal to the button where the text and the icon will not be permitted to grow larger than. So if I added like 35 to the padding on this one, you can see that the text is now being kind of blocked off because the padding is thicker than the text. Really useful for kind of force shrinking the size of your icons. Stroke, that is the border around your control. Like if I made this have a nice black stroke and I increase the size of that stroke to 10, we'll see that we get a nice thick stroke around it. That's pretty self-explanatory. You can choose an icon for anything, of course. We have a library of icons in here that are of intriguing choice.
And value.
I'm sure many of them have value. And many other ones also exist.
There's a Bitcoin one that definitely has no value because that is fake.
If you put that icon on your button, first of all, then you instantly become rich when you press it. That's just how it works. Anyways, we've also, you can choose the color of that icon. You can choose if it's aligned to the left or the right. Also, button style. By default, a lot of buttons come in with the gloss enabled, which means they sort of have this 3D effect on them. You can choose to go to flat, which is a bit more of a modern look, where it's just a single fill color for the whole thing.
Something that I do like pointing out, though, is this image option. I think this is wildly underused. If you select image, you could actually bring in a custom image for the on, off versions of the button, as well as the pressed on and pressed off versions of the button, which means that you can kind of create almost an animation in itself of the button if you have something that's slightly different for each of those options. Aside from the button properties, there's the graphical properties, there's also text style. That's, again, pretty straightforward. Color, size, font, the font style, whether you want it bold. You have plenty of options here within Q-SYS. And then we have the alignment as well. So again, these are all very straightforward. If you were to give this to somebody who's never seen Q-SYS Designer before and had them start playing with these properties, they would most likely be able to get the hang of them relatively quickly without having to understand anything else here. So they're very good. However, there are just basic limitations to using them solely to build out your UCI. If you have a small UCI, it's perfectly fine. It's easy just to go through, make a few changes, get what you like. But in our case, we are using we are adding a lot more to our UCI, so it would be a bit more cumbersome to try to just use the properties themselves. The other thing that I want to point out is the idea that if you build your UCI and let's say you make every single button a specific shade of blue, and then you're done, you're set to go, and then somebody comes back and says, that's the wrong shade of blue. Well, if you're just using the native properties, you're gonna have to go back into that UCI and change that color for every specific piece that it's attached to. If it's all buttons, you'd have to go layer by layer, change all of those buttons' colors, and that will take forever. It's tedious. It's going to bog you down.
The same is true of fonts. Let's say your marketing organization decided to do a complete rebrand and decided that the font needed to change. You could do so in one place.
Not to mention that the native properties only give you access to a certain number of fonts that come in the software anyways, but you can embed your own fonts using CSS. Again, you can change that globally using CSS later on. Same is true of graphics, logos, etc.
So what stylesheets allows is actually, it allows for those global changes to be much quicker, almost with a few clicks of a button. So again, the native properties are great when you have something smaller, but in our case, with something a bit bigger, or maybe UCI you're going to be using multiple times, we want to make sure that we're going to be using some style sheets or CSS. So what we're going to do first is we're going to show you how to build your own style sheet. It will be relatively basic, but we just want to get you the idea of how you would go about doing this and then setting it up in Designer. Then once we've done that, we'll actually grab one that has already been built for this class and we'll install that one, and I'll show you how to do that, being as that most likely will be the most common way that you're using a style sheet.